Welcome to How I Built My Fundraising Consultancy, the stories behind the people driving results in the nonprofit sector.
The famous story around here that Jeff Brooks and I tell is that there's a big direct mail fundraising piece for a mission, and it was the Fill the Pantry campaign, and it accidentally went out with a huge headline that said Fill the Panty instead of Fill the Pantry. And it was a quiet day at the office when we found out that that had gone out to something like 50,000 people in Seattle. Oh my gosh, it was brutal. And that mailing did great. It did great. It did better than expected. And so it wasn't something you'd ever do on purpose, but it just sort of proved the rule that we see again and again. You make mistakes, people tend to notice. Certainly don't advocate for mistakes or typos, but they are not the disaster you think they're going to be.
Hi there. Welcome to How I Built My Fundraising Consultancy. I'm Tim Chatton, Marketing Solutionist at MarketSmart. Today on the show is Stephen Screen, co-founder of the Better Fundraising Company and co-host of the Fundraising is Beautiful podcast. The interview today is loaded full of great tips, including why it's important to create a menu of services, the value of free content offers, and is a great example of someone doing everything right in his first few years of running a consultancy. You can find more information about Stephen at www.betterfundraising.com. Here's my interview with Stephen. I'm here today with Stephen Screen of the Better Fundraising Company. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. So you're based out of Seattle, and you both run a podcast. You're co-host of Fundraising is Beautiful, but you also started up a couple of years ago, about 3.5 years ago, the Better Fundraising Company.
That's right.
So first, can you walk me through Fundraising is Beautiful? What is that show? It's been running for now 8 years.
Yeah, that is a podcast about fundraising that I co-host with Jeff Brooks, another creative director well-known in the fundraising space, as he's written 3 books and is on the speaking circuit. We basically started it almost 10 years ago now because we saw there was a need for a podcast about fundraising. Both of us think that fundraising is beautiful, and it was happening in a time where fundraising was getting knocked a lot in the public sector. We basically wanted to say 2 things. One, this is a beautiful thing. It's a fantastic relationship builder between donors and beneficiaries and organizations. And then number 2, we both come at it from a really data-driven perspective, having done lots and lots of fundraising for big organizations and tracked the results. And so we were trying to bring that data-driven perspective into a part of the fundraising ecosystem, I guess, that at that point was more about donor hugs and put glitter on your appeals, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we wanted to speak into that because we felt like, hey, there's some data here that can really help people raise more money.
Excellent. And how often is that show released?
Highly irregularly.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've done, I think, 105 or 106 episodes at this point. So there's a big back catalog, and we're doing it at least once a month now. Occasionally, we ramp it up to twice a month.
Okay. Yeah. And how do you come up with ideas for new topics for that show?
Jeff comes over. We each open some interesting beer that I've bought from a wine shop down the street, and we brainstorm topics. We also both keep a list of stuff. They're like, hey, we should talk about this.
Awesome. So your consultancy, you co-run it with Jim Shapiro. You've been doing this since April 2014, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We each had our own firm, and we started doing a bunch of work together in, I think, 2012, and then legally combined our firms in 2014 to form the Better Fundraising Company, and we've been sort of running since then.
Okay. And your pitch is all about building relationships with donors and making sure the communication happens from the nonprofit to the donor to build relationships. That's kind of your pitch. Is that accurate?
That's it in a nutshell. We codified this rhythm of communicating to donors that we call ask, thank, report, repeat, where donors are asked to help the beneficiaries, they're thanked promptly and emotionally, and then they are reported back to on the power and effects of their gifts. And then the organization can repeat the rhythm again and again, building a relationship each time. We did a bunch of research and saw that A, that's what really successful fundraising organizations tended to be doing, and B, less than 10% of organizations regularly report to their donors on what donors' gifts have done. And we think there's a really big relationship there between organizations that are struggling in fundraising and dropping retention levels. That's sort of what we preach, for lack of a better word, is this ask, thank, report, repeat rhythm of communications. And thus far, it's really working well.
Okay. And I have to compliment you. Of all the consultants' websites I've seen, yours is among the best. It's very well designed. The homepage is great. It's got that free resource and going over what you just went over in video format. I think 30 minutes or less is what you describe it as. And, success stories is a very easy way to get in touch with you. It's got a pretty active blog that I believe. Do you write that blog?
I write most of the posts, and Jim, my partner, writes some of them as well.
Excellent. And I also really love a very clear message about what to expect when you sign up for the email alerts. It's, get fundraising tips and tricks sent to your inbox, email every time a new blog post comes up, and a special message every quarter with invites to webinars, conferences we'll be speaking at, and more. So it's very clear what you're going to get, and that's a really good example to a website. Look at betterfundraising.com because you guys are doing it really right there.
Thank you for that compliment. I appreciate that because we worked hard on that, and we really try to be clear. And just for an interesting little backstory, Jim and I, our whole deal is that we started working for really big national nonprofits, and we want to help small to medium nonprofits apply some of those data-driven best practices to their fundraising. That's our goal, to lift the boat, to lift the tide for all of the small boats in this nonprofit ocean. To that end, before we started Better Fundraising Company, we actually started something called Better Fundraising For All, where we were trying to give away all of the knowledge that we know and that other people know to help small nonprofits. And that ended up morphing into the Better Fundraising Company. I say that to just underpin the whole thing we're trying to do here is raise the ocean so that more nonprofits can raise more money. We try to give away as much stuff as possible.
Yeah. No, it's a good approach.
Yeah, well, we've benefited from stuff that you guys have had on your blog and conversations I've had with Greg Warner. We're very much cut from the same cloth. We love you guys.
Well, thank you. With the data-driven part of what you're aspiring to do, what tools or what approaches do you bring to the nonprofits you work with to allow them to get at data, and then how do you work with that data?
I guess there are sort of three phases. Number one is letting them know that data is available. For instance, a lot of the small to medium-sized nonprofits, A, they don't track everything, and B, they literally don't know that there is this big, massive fundraising industry where there are, several agencies in the U.S. with several hundred people who do fundraising all the time and track the results and figure out what works best. And there's a set of knowledge that people like you and me have learned from that can be shared and applied to smaller nonprofits. And just that idea that there's a set of knowledge out there that's data-driven is news to a lot of nonprofits. So that's sort of phase one, is we let them know and then we apply things that we know. Just as a, for instance, right, the PS and appeal letter is one of the most important lines in the whole letter because eye tracking studies show that it's read first. Okay, fine. Most people don't know that. We share that data with them and off they go. That's phase number one. Phase number two is getting them to track everything. What's the response rate? How many people sent in a gift, whether you're online or offline? Which donors are you mailing to? Is it 0 to 12 or are you mailing everybody? All that stuff, tracking all those things. That's phase two. And then phase three is setting up internal systems that surface the right information often. And for the most part, it's a set of spreadsheets that are tracking everything so that the organization is learning from what it's doing and regularly checking in on the metrics that really matter. For us, the two main ones there are net revenue and donor retention rates. That's the main phase. And then once you get organizations excited about that, once you get them realizing that, hey, we are doing all this market testing all the time, but we're not tracking anything, so we're not learning very much, then they often, not always, get excited and eventually start raising more money because they have a better idea of what works and what doesn't for their donors.
Mm-hmm. Now, your strength is data. What's Jim's strength?
So I come at it from a creative direction and a data background, and Jim comes at it from a major donor and sort of organizational strategy background. He was VP of development for a couple $100 million nonprofit and learned all the stuff that you learned there, especially for creating major donor relationships and then systematizing a major donor program. That's what he brings to the table, and mine was all more mass donor and communication stuff.
Okay. And I noticed on your website that you mentioned your second generation fundraisers. So was your parents fundraisers, or what experience did you have just growing up?
Yeah, so my father was one of the first generation of mass market fundraisers in the late 50s and early 60s. Starting to use mailing list, figuring out that personalization made sense. He worked with the team that helped come up with the child sponsorship offer for World Vision, directed and produced the very first television show that World Vision ever did. He came at it from this data-driven background. How do you use mass media to talk to hundreds of thousands, millions of donors? He had an agency, and I worked at his agency for about 8 years right after I graduated from college. So I was sort of steeped in all of this stuff. I call it the yin of data and the yang of storytelling for how do you build donor relationships effectively over time.
Okay. Seeing that as a kid, I didn't really want to be a doctor because my parents were doctors. Did the way he did it inspire you to do the same?
No, I wanted to go into the Foreign Service. My degree was international relations. My plan was to go take the Foreign Service exam and go, work in the Nigerian consulate. Mm-hmm. And right after I graduated from college, he had a vice president leave his company, try to take her clients, fail, and then, by the way, had the guts to ask for her job back. And he needed someone. And so I said, I will happily help, of course. So I went there, and obviously I wasn't a VP, but I had some experience. And it turned out that I had a knack for it and really enjoyed the work. And that was in 1993, so a long time ago.
So you worked with your dad at his company. Did you have other jobs in the nonprofit fundraising realm before your consultancy? What was your trajectory to starting your own?
So I worked at his agency, and his agency was a big agency helping a lot of nonprofits nationally. And then I worked at a company after I left my dad's shop, worked at an agency here in Seattle called the Domain Group, and was there for a few years before I went out on my own and started my own agency to help nonprofits. So for the entirety of my career, I have been on the agency side, the outside consultants helping internal people do fundraising.
Okay. Approaching new clients or trying to get new business, what's your approach now, and has that changed in the 3.5 years since you started your consultancy?
It has changed a little bit. At the beginning, we got almost all of our clients through referrals and our personal networks, because both Jim and I had been around long enough and knew people that people would hear about us or we would talk to people. Now, more and more, we get new clients through marketing. We have the website, we do Facebook advertising, we do Google advertising, and we are starting to spin up more of a content marketing strategy for our company.
Mm-hmm. How much of a financial investment did you need to make to get this started, if any?
At the beginning, zero financial investment. I will say that when I first left the agency world and started my own shop, I knew that I was going to leave that agency, but I didn't know when, and so I started freelancing. And I had a deal with myself where as soon as I had enough regular freelancing income where I could pay my mortgage every month, that was a sign that I would probably make it as a freelancer on my way to starting a company. And so I landed a big thing and knew that I was in really good shape for the next year and a half, and launched my company from there.
Okay, so you had a client that you could bring over to consultancy and not be worried about some lean months.
Correct. My income dipped for a month, and then the second month, my income was higher than it had been.
That's definitely a good situation to be in.
Yeah, I felt really fortunate. That was just because I had been around a while and I had a network of people. And I also think that for all the consultants out there listening to this, or the people who want to do it, you don't know me well enough to know how odd this is for me to say, but I actually think there is this force that wants you to succeed. Not to over spiritualize it, you get positive feedback from the universe when you go out and try these things. And there is literal sort of noise, vibrations, whatever you want to call it, in the marketplace that people hear about you, they want to help you, and good things happen. I bet I could name 10 off the top of my head, 10 people who started stuff where really good things happened in the first few months because they were good, they were paying attention, and I've seen a lot of successes. So that's my encouragement to people out there who are listening, thinking about this. Go for it. Mm-hmm. And let people know.
Yeah. You've been running 3.5 years now. Has it just been you and Jim the whole time, or do you employ virtual assistants or in-person staff that helps you?
We have a small staff of 2.5 full-time people here in Seattle, in addition to me and Jim. We use one of the organizations overseas that outsources time so that we can get inexpensive labor for some projects. And then we have a host of writers, designers, web programmers who we use and basically assemble small teams for clients or projects.
Okay. So you're able to upscale and downscale as needed to accommodate more clients or less clients as you have them?
Yeah, like 3 or 4 writers, 2 or 3 designers, web marketing guy, a web designer, 2 web developers, all those people doing various things for us and for other organizations.
Okay. I noticed on your website you've got a very clear menu of services. Was this the original services list, or did you have to fine-tune this over the years to perfect it?
That's a good question. We fine-tuned it over the years. The really big lesson that we learned that I would love to share with people is get really specific in your price point and your product offerings, and that will almost always lead to getting more clients. I can't tell you how much more successful we are now at landing new business because we publish, here's what it costs. Here's what we do. If it's for you, you'll say yes. Whereas before, people would contact us and we'd say, well, what do you need? What's your budget? And then try to design a bespoke thing for each organization. That didn't work nearly as well as the strategy we have now, which is basically 3 levels of pricing. An organization can sort of find where they fit, and we eliminate a question for them by publishing everything.
So you found a rate that works. So at the high end, it's $2,500 a month, and that's for consulting time for both you and Jim, or are they choosing one of the two of you?
Usually it's both of us, not always. It sort of depends on what the organization needs, but usually it's both of us.
Okay. And have you found the spread of offerings, are people going towards one more than the others?
It's a bit of a mixed bag. We definitely find that people will engage us for a 2-hour, what we call a deep dive, to help them solve some acute fundraising problem or situation. Many of those people will go ahead and then we think of it as upgrading into a monthly relationship with us.
And will you take that $950 and put it towards the $2,500?
No, that's an interesting idea, but we did that 2 times in the last couple of months where, for instance, in June, we did a deep dive for a client and they said, oh, this is really good. We'd like to enter a monthly relationship with you, and that monthly relationship starts in July or August.
Oh, okay. So like a following month from then. Okay.
Yep. And we also have a lot of people who just say, hey, this makes sense. We'd like to get in a monthly relationship.
What type of clients are you finding the most success with? Is it a certain vertical that's really hitting off for your consultancy?
I guess there are a couple verticals that we tend to play in. We do a bunch of work with organizations that help homeless moms and kids. I do not know how that happened, but for whatever reason, we've had great success. And so we have a handful of those organizations around the country.
Around the country, so not just Seattle-based.
Correct.
Okay.
And then we also do a bunch national relief and development. And again, those organizations are around the country. We do some stuff with the arts, a bunch of stuff with schools, some environmental stuff. We're a bit all over the map because mainly some of the fundamentals we teach, right? Reporting back to donors on the effects of their gifts, that goes for almost everybody, not just one particular sector. Back about a year ago, and we were looking at the clients where we were really having success with, both in terms of the results and a good relationship. And there were 3 things that stood out immediately. Number 1 was the organization already had enough donors to make a difference. The low point was around 500. This is for a monthly retainer relationship. So they had to have at least 500 or 1,000 donors. Number 2 was they needed to want us there. Meaning, sometimes a major donor will pay for our services for a year as a gift to an organization that they're helping, but the organization doesn't want to learn what we have to teach. That doesn't work. And then number 3, we have to have access to leadership. We have to have access to the people eventually making the final decisions, because if we can't influence the way that they think, a lot of the data-driven but counterintuitive fundraising things that we teach, like your message should be simpler, not more complex, don't work. They get shot down once they go up the chain. So we've got to have access to leadership.
Okay. Those are all part of your standard contract before starting work with the client.
It's not part of the contract, but we ask those questions.
Okay.
Like, we ask them how big their donor file are. We ask them, you've seen our stuff. Do you want to work with us? And then do we have access to the leadership? And that's been a really good predictor of success.
Okay. What are some of your favorite tools to work with?
Video conferencing is great. It saves us so much time. It is way better at building relationship with clients than the phone. A tool that we use internally for project management is a service called Basecamp, and we use that to keep track of all of our internal clients, as well as for clients where we have a lot going on, we invite them to the service as well, and so they can track everything that's going on, who is responsible, what dates they're due, all of that project management stuff. Those are the 2 really big tools, other than, I would say, data. tracking what's
Yeah.
working for organizations and what's not.
You'll track that in a spreadsheet application?
Yeah, so we use Excel and we have this document. I call it a pro forma because that's what it was called when I started out in the business. But it's this massive spreadsheet that tracks all the emails you send, all the revenue you're getting, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And is basically helping you know what to do more of and what to do less of.
Yeah. What's been the biggest mistake you've made during your consultancy, and what lessons have you learned from that?
Two come to mind. I wish I would have started blogging and promoting earlier. A couple of the places that I worked for had more business than they could handle, and it was because of the reputation of the founders. I somehow ended up with an assumption that if I was good, people would beat down my door asking for work. And that was a bad assumption in a market that's so much bigger than it was 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so the promotion that we're doing now is overdue.
Yeah.
This is sort of a side note, but one of the biggest mistakes I made was we were doing this massive direct mail piece for an organization in Canada, and somehow on the reply device, the print vendor was sent like version 6 of the reply device instead of the final version of the reply device.
Oops.
So to, 80,000 people in the Toronto area, they got a 3/4 complete reply device, and the client flipped and stopped payment on their bills. And this is when I was just starting and left me hanging for like $25,000.
Wow.
That was a brutal mistake.
Yeah.
The amazing and maybe disappointing thing is that they continued their direct mail program. This was one of the first things they had done, and they continued it, but they would never tell me how that piece did. And I always wanted to know, because in my experience, when you send out direct mail or email with mistakes, your response rate tends to be good or even better than normal.
People will tell you there's a mistake. They'll reach out, right?
Well, yeah, and for whatever reason, they notice the mistake, so they tend to engage with the piece for a few more seconds, and therefore, you're more likely to get a response.
You probably don't want to do this every time, otherwise you just look incompetent.
Totally true. The famous story around here that Jeff Brooks and I tell is that there's a big direct mail fundraising piece for a mission, and it was the Fill the Pantry campaign, and it accidentally went out with a huge headline that said Fill the Panty instead of Fill the Pantry, and it was a quiet day at the office when we found out that had gone out to something like 50,000 people in Seattle.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh my gosh, it was brutal. And that mailing did great. It did great. It did better than expected.
That's crazy.
And so it wasn't something you'd ever do on purpose, but it just sort of proved the rule that we see again and again. You make mistakes, people tend to notice.
Yeah.
Anyway, certainly don't advocate for mistakes or typos, but they are not the disaster you think they're going to be.
When we return, a quick lightning round with Steven. First, quick break, we'll learn about the Smart Ideas blog from us here at MarketSmart. You've heard Steven talk about the value of Greg's blog posts. If you're running consultancy, an active blog is a really important component to your site. Greg Warner, MarketSmart CEO, writes the Smart Ideas blog, available at www.imarketsmart.com/smartideas. You'll find a new blog post there every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I think you'll learn a ton about fundraising and learn by example some of the important components of creating a great blog. Visit imarketsmart.com/smartideas to access it. That's www.imarketsmart.com/smartideas. With that, let's get to the lightning round with Steven. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
I'm going to slightly answer and say fundraising advice. Donors fund outcomes, not processes. So stop talking about the process by which you help people. Instead, talk about how people have been helped.
What are you most proud of?
Starting a business on my own in 2004 and still being in business and thriving.
What piece of advice would you have for yourself as a 25-year-old?
Keep working on building your network intentionally and start earlier.
What book would you recommend to those getting started, and why?
Almost anything by Seth Godin, in particular Poke the Box, and What to Do When It's Your Turn, and It's Always Your Turn.
What's your favorite personal productivity habit?
It's one I don't always follow, but if I spend the first hour or two of the morning creating, then I do a much better job creating throughout the rest of the day. If I just spend my first couple hours either consuming media or processing things, like processing email, then my brain gets into a consuming or processing mode, and I don't do as much good thinking for our clients.
What's the best under $100 purchase you've made in the last month or so?
I would say good coffee. Not that I'm a huge coffee hound, but that's a good answer.
Your favorite monthly subscription or service you're signed up for?
Seth Godin's blog in fundraising. It's the Veritas Group and The Agitator and Wired Magazine.
What's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
I played tennis competitively through and after college, and I love a good head injury story.
What's one of your most important passions outside of work?
I love design and designing processes, from both setting up a home, mine and my wife's home, to be sort of successful and efficient, all the way down to, where to put the peanut butter so that you never have to think about where the peanut butter is.
Desk or car, what would you clean first?
Desk.
Favorite animal and why?
Big dog that doesn't shed, and because I grew up with a great dog.
Yeah. What do clients never ask you that you wish they did?
I wish more clients said, how do we need to think differently about this? Because most clients are interested in tactics, but I think successful fundraising comes from a real shift in how you're thinking, away from 14 things to make your appeal better and into more of what you'd call long cuts, not shortcuts. The things you need to do and think about differently in order to have success over time.
What is the most common error you see nonprofits make?
Narcissism, being selfish in that they think that what motivates them to give to their organization and love their organization is what's going to motivate other people, because that's almost always a mismatch.
And what are the best nonprofits doing right?
They're really good at asking, thinking, and reporting. They have really good fundraising offers, and they have really strong major donor programs and relationships.
Okay. And what charities do you admire or support?
So I really admire Charity Water. Got to interview Scott, the founder, on the Fundraising is Beautiful podcast a couple of weeks ago, and that was an incredible interview. He's doing great. I admire the small $250,000 to $5 million organizations that have made the turn from survival mode into starting to sort of think about long-term success and not just next month's numbers. That's an incredibly hard transition to make. And for the people who figure out how to do that in that sector, gosh, you have my applause, because that is so hard.
Where can people find more information about your services and your consultancy?
BetterFundraising.com, and be sure to go to our blog there. Also, as we're recording this, either today or tomorrow, we're releasing a free book on storytelling for nonprofits. Free ebook, I should say, that we're really excited about. There's a ton of really good stuff in there to help people raise money. I tweet occasionally at Steven Screen.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for your time today. It's been wonderful chatting with you about all this.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on. And I hope for the consultants listening, I hope that this is encouraging, because our sector needs more really good data-driven folks. There's 1.6 million nonprofits in the country, and a lot of people need help. This is a big market. There's certainly room for more really good people.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for listening to this episode of How I Built My Fundraising Consultancy, presented by MarketSmart. If you like the show, make sure to review it on iTunes and pass it along to a friend or colleague. If you're curious about what we do, make sure to check out imarketsmart.com, and don't forget to check out the Smart Ideas blog by visiting www.imarketsmart.com/smartideas. Thanks for listening.